Welcome to the latest episode of Quest for Twice. In this episode, I would like to cover what I learned about the energy transition, specifically transition from fossil fuel to renewable energy in the future. It's a big topic, so I will likely take more than one episode to cover all the information. So first, let's look at the information presented by ExxonMobil in the Q3 earning presentation. So in the bar graph, it showed the price margin in the last 10 years from 2010 to 2020 before the pandemic and the recession hit. And the red dots were the realized price or earning by ExxonMobil in Q3 in this year. So the key takeaway is that the earning environment by ExxonMobil is either at the bottom of the 10-year range or has significantly below the bottom of the 10-year range, especially related to downstream, which is a refinery and as well as natural gas. For crude oil and chemical, the realized margin is at the bottom of the 10-year range. So usually there is a key principle in life is a regression to mean. So I'm confident that so is Exxon's executives that the price and the margin will recover at least to the lower end of the 10-year range in the short term, let's say in the 2-3 years. However, if I want to invest in the energy industry, specifically investing in the oil and gas industry, then a key question is what will happen in the longer term? What happens to the energy transition away from oil and gas to the renewable energy? So last month, DNV GL issued their annual forecast of energy transition. The DNV GL is a Norwegian consulting company, and they are very entrenched in the energy production, transmission, and consumption industries. So they have a very good insight in the current state of the energy. And they use that and develop a model to produce a forecast into the next 30 years about the energy demand and where the energy supply will come from. So in this bottom chart, it shows that DNV forecasts that the energy will only grow slowly after the fast V-shaped recovery from COVID-19 induced recession, and will likely peak in the early 2030s before it starts to decline fairly slowly. Then there are top three consumption sectors: transportation, building, and manufacturing. And each takes about 30% of the energy consumption. And the rest is consumed by non-energy, for example, the fertilizer and the plastic production. So it's very interesting to see DNV forecast a energy consumption peak about 10 to 15 years away from today, because DNV acknowledged that the energy demand will likely grow if based on historical trend. Actually, we can see a significant slope break before 2020 and after 2020. Before 2020, the steady increase in energy demand was driven by world population growth as well as the GDP growth. Basically, more people will need more energy, and when poor people make more money, on per capita basis, the people will consume more energy. So you times those two factors together, you kind of get a faster energy demand growth than a linear trend. So it is striking to see DNV forecast a slope break and eventually peak of energy demand. So the main reasons given by DNV is the efficiency gain, and also the COVID-19 may permanently shave the 5-6% of world GDP. And the efficiency gain, in DNV's opinion, is largely driven by transport sector. As a result, the transport sector consumes less energy down the road comparing to the building and the manufacturing sectors, and they actually consume a little more than today. So why DNV thinks massive efficiency of energy use can be gained? DNV believes that will come from massive electrification, which means electricity will become the main carrier of energy. So, for example, for transportation sector, that means battery-powered vehicles will be the predominant automobiles comparing to currently internal combustion engine. DNVGL also believes that the world CO2 emissions has already peaked before COVID hit. Then from there, it will only go down. And in this graph, it shows the contribution of different types of fossil fuel to CO2 emission. The biggest decline comes from less consumption of coal, and followed by oil. The natural gas, actually, we'll see later that will actually grow in the next 10-20 years. This slide presents the energy consumption by the road transportation sector specifically. And as we can see that most of the current energy consumption supporting road transportation is from oil. So basically gasoline and diesel. And DNV forecast that it will have a fairly rapid decline. And we can also see that there is a blue wedge and significant increase in its share of road transportation energy demand from 2021 to 2050. And of course, all forecast is subject to a lot of uncertainties. So it is then informative to compare DNV's forecast with forecast by Bloomberg. So the top graph was the road transport emission forecasted by Bloomberg. I presented several weeks ago. And the blue area is the emission by the road transportation, and the black wedge is the emission avoided by electric vehicles. And so the emission is a proxy for oil consumption, and therefore it's an apple-to-apple comparison with what the DNV forecasts. So the Bloomberg forecast the consumption will not peak until about 10 to 15 years from today, compared to the rapid consumption decline forecasted by DNV. So the key assumption to support DNV forecast of energy demand and fossil fuel demand by the world road transportation sector is the uptake of battery electric vehicles. So this graph shows the DNV forecast of electric vehicle uptake worldwide. So the bottom, the dark blue versus light blue is the combustion engine versus electric vehicle uptake. And DNV forecast very slow growth of internal combustion engine in the world. And for the commercial vehicle, the uptake of electric vehicles happens later than the passenger vehicles. On the top, the blue versus light blue are the 2 and the 3 wheel vehicles like motorcycles. And DNV forecasts a very fast uptake of the electric motorbikes and electric scooters in the world. However, considering that the motorcycles are very energy efficient in terms of having very high gas mileage, so that sector actually doesn't have a lot of impact on the total consumption of gasoline and diesel in the world. The most important consumption sectors are the passenger vehicles and the commercial vehicles. So why does DNV forecast such fast uptake of electric vehicles? That's DNV belief that's driven by the price and including the initial purchase price and the life cycle total ownership cost, as well as the convenience factor, which includes the prevalence of charging network. So, for example, DNV believe the price parity between electric vehicles and the combustion engine vehicles will reach parity in next 5 to 10 years. Which is interesting to me because if the price parity won't be reached until 5 to 10 years, why does DNV forecast such a slow growth in the conventional passenger vehicles? So to me, there is a disconnect. Now, let's take a look at the sector of building. So DNV forecasts the growth in the energy demand from building in the next 30 years. But if we look closely, the growth in the energy demand come mostly from the appliance, lighting, and the space cooling sectors. That's due to the population growth and the GDP per capita growth I mentioned earlier. DNV actually forecast fairly steady consumption from the cooking and the heating subsectors. And the reason given by DNV is that for cooking, there will be a lot of fuel switching from biomass, for example, wood in the poor area of the world to electricity. And for heating, for water and space heating, DNV forecasts the uptake of heat pump technology, which will use electricity instead of burning oil or natural gas. Therefore, the DNV forecasts a lot of efficiency from electrification in the water heating and the space heating. Now, we look at the world manufacturing energy demand. So the again, the DNV forecast flat growth. However, the manufactured goods sector is forecast to grow because of the population and the GDP growth. And the iron, steel, and the base material sector is forecast to actually flat or even reduction of energy demand by DNV GL. And the reason given by DNV is that there will be a lot of material recycle. For example, recycle of iron and steel and other base material. Also, electrification in manufacturing business to introduce energy efficiency. Now, let's look at the energy used for feedstock. For example, feedstock for plastic as well as fertilizer. As a reminder that that's about 10% of the total worldwide energy demand. So on this graph, we can see that the total demand of energy as a feedstock had a very rapid increase in the last 30 years. That reflects the population growth as well as the GDP growth. However, DNV forecast a kink or a slope break at 2020 and peak in 2030, and then rapid decline from there. So that, to me, that's remarkable to see that type of slope, drastic slope change. And DNV believes that's driven by plastic recycle. For example, currently there is a very little plastic recycle currently happening, and the DNV forecast almost half of the plastic will be recycled in 30 years from today. So in summary, DNV believes 2020 is a special year, and the growth of energy demand will significantly slow after 2020 compared to the growth before 2020, and the energy demand will peak in 10 to 15 years from now. And that change, according to DNV, is driven by three key factors. One is a behavior change. People, for example, will recycle more and buy more electric vehicles. The second one is technology, because the new technology, for example, heat pump and battery and the generation from wind and solar, all that will favor the energy transition. And the third one implied is a massive investment in the renewable energy and the related consumption. For example, installation of solar panels and the windmills, new transmission lines, and investing in the infrastructure to charge electric vehicles, and electrification of buildings and manufacturing, massive adoption of heat pumps. So all those factors were assumed to underline the conclusion that from DNV-GL that the energy demand will peak in 10 to 15 years from today, and the consumption of fossil fuel, including coal, oil, and natural gas, has already peaked because of the impact of COVID-19, and also because of the energy transition in the next 10 to 15 years. So in the next episode, I will review the specific impact on the supply of oil and gas, as well as the demand for electricity. Until next time, happy investing.